The most powerful man on the base thought he was putting an insignificant female technician in her place. But from the way she handled equipment, to the calm precision in her movements, to the way she traced a classified breach at 3 a.m., everything pointed to one terrifying truth. The most dangerous person here was never outside the wire, but standing right inside the command room.
That grating voice cut through the morning calm. Well, what do we have here? Did the real soldiers order a coffee runner? The hallway erupted in laughter. A team of 8 burly Navy SEALs, led by the silver-haired Admiral Conrad Ree, crowded the doorway to the drone control room. Ree stood with his arms crossed, a man who looked like he didn't just command the base, but the very ocean itself. But the woman at the console didn't flinch. She was a fraction of their size, her hair pulled back severely, her uniform plain and without rank. Her hands, however, were perfectly still, hovering over the controls of a $15 million spy drone deep in enemy territory. Ree swaggered into the room, filling the cramped space with a scent of expensive cologne and entitlement. His men smirked behind him, ready for a little morning sport at the new girl's expense. "I asked you a question, miss," he said, his voice a low theatrical rumble. "What is your rank?" She turned her head slowly, her movements deliberate and devoid of fear. Her eyes, the color of a gathering storm, met his. For a heartbeat, the Admiral's smug expression wavered. "Higher than yours, sir," she replied, her tone perfectly level. "You just haven't been notified yet." In an instant, the hallway fell completely silent. Someone coughed. A boot scuffed the floor. The soft whir of the servers suddenly roared in the quiet. Then, Admiral Ree tipped his head back and bellowed a laugh, a clear command for his men to join in. They did, their laughter a bit shaky at first, then growing louder as they took his cue. "That's a good one," he sneered, leaning against the doorframe, effectively trapping her. A real comedian. "Tell you what, after you're done polishing my boots, I'll see if we can find you a real uniform." The woman simply turned back to her monitor. She began a quiet, rhythmic breathing pattern. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. In the corner, Master Chief Roy Garrett, pretending to be absorbed in a maintenance log, watched the whole scene from under his thick, gray brows. At 62 years old, Garrett had been in the Navy since before these SEALs were born. He could smell trouble a mile away, and this situation reeked of it. It was the way she held the console's tablet, 3 fingers cradling the bottom, her thumb and index finger bracing the side. That wasn't how civilians held things. It wasn't even how most sailors held things. That was a specific grip drilled into operators at elite combat schools, places where you learn to function under fire, where dropping your gear could mean someone doesn't make it home. It was pure muscle memory for when your mind is too busy screaming to think. Garrett's pen stopped moving. He didn't look up, but his jaw tightened. The woman saved her work with 3 quick keystrokes. She didn't have to check a manual or pause to think. The security protocols on these systems were updated monthly, and it typically took even experienced operators a few minutes to navigate the new login. She'd done it in under 10 seconds. "You know what I think?" Ree said, pushing off the wall and stalking toward her. His team pressed in behind him, their bulk shrinking the room. "I think there's been a mistake. This is a classified area for SEAL team operations." She rose from her chair in a single, fluid motion. As she clasped her hands behind her back, they settled into the flawless, textbook at ease posture. It wasn't just close to regulation. It was perfect. The kind of perfection that only comes from thousands of hours of training until your body just does it without thinking. "Let me make this very simple," Ree said, playing to his audience. "You have 30 seconds to explain what a civilian technician is doing with access to my drone before I have you escorted out of here in handcuffs." 28 seconds now, added Lieutenant Hayes, ever the Admiral's yes man. She reached into the pocket of her uniform shirt, and for a split second, Ree's hand twitched toward the sidearm on his hip. But all she pulled out was a standard issue contractor ID. "Technical consultant," she stated, holding it out, "cleared for all non-combat system support." Ree snatched the card from her hand, scrutinizing it like a cheap forgery. He even held it up to the overhead light, checking the holographic seal. It was 100% legitimate. It had to be. But something about her calm defiance was getting under his skin, and powerful men like Admiral Ree don't like to feel challenged. "Listen here, Miss Consultant," he said, flicking the ID back at her. It hit her chest and fluttered to the ground. She didn't move to catch it. "I don't give a damn what that plastic says. You will stay out of my way. You don't touch tactical equipment. You don't look at classified mission data. You fix a broken monitor when you're told, and you will make yourself scarce when real operators are working." "Is that clear?" she replied coolly. As she bent to retrieve her ID, her sleeve slid up just enough to reveal a jagged scar on her forearm. It wasn't a clean line from a surgeon's scalpel. It was the ugly, starburst pattern left by shrapnel from a nearby explosion. Chief Warrant Officer Kline saw it, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He'd seen enough action to recognize that kind of wound. But Ree was already turning his back on her, dismissing her from his mind. He had a briefing to get to, an exercise to oversee, and an entire naval base of people who scurried when he barked. Why would he waste another thought on some IT girl who probably got her job through a family connection? "Lieutenant Hayes," Ree barked from the hallway. "Make sure our new friend understands that this room is off limits unless I grant her access personally in writing." "Yes, sir," Hayes said with a cruel smile, turning to the woman. "Don't you worry, miss. We'll find something more suited to your talents. Maybe the mess hall needs a dishwasher." The sound of their laughter faded down the corridor as the door swung shut, leaving her alone once more. The control room was quiet again, filled only with the hum of electronics. Garrett still sat in the corner, pretending to review his checklist, but his gaze was fixed on the woman. She walked calmly back to her station, sat down, and brought the same diagnostic screen back up. Her hands resumed their work on the keyboard, her grip still precise and practiced. "Been on the job long?" Garrett asked, his voice a low, gravelly sound shaped by years of yelling over engine noise. She didn't startle or look away from her work. "Long enough, Master Chief." She knew his rank without looking at his uniform. "Interesting, those login codes," he continued. He tapped his logbook with his pen. "Most folks need to look up the new sequence. Takes them a good 10-15 minutes. I've worked on similar platforms before," she said, offering nothing more. "Similar," Garrett repeated, nodding slowly to himself. "Right. I suppose that's one word for it." She finally turned to look at him, her stormy eyes sizing him up, calculating. "Was there something else I could help you with, Master Chief?" "Just making an observation," he said. He closed his book and got to his feet with the stiffness of a man whose knees had absorbed too many hard landings. "I've been in this Navy for 43 years, seen all kinds. Seen contractors who talk a big game and consultants who know a lot more than their job description says." He walked to the door, placing a hand on the frame. "And I've seen operators, the quiet professionals, the ones who don't need to announce who they are." She remained silent, her attention back on the screen. Garrett pulled the door open, but paused one last time. "That breathing exercise you were doing," he said softly. "The 4x4 count, that's a combat stress management technique. They teach that at places like Fort Bragg and Coronado, places most people have only seen in movies." He left without waiting for a reply. "Have a nice day, ma'am." The door clicked shut. Her fingers never stopped typing, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. On her wrist, partially hidden by her cuff, was a digital watch set to a 24-hour clock. But it had an extra feature. A small, flush-mounted button on the side, almost invisible, unless you were specifically looking for it. The kind of custom modification that doesn't come from a store. She glanced at it. Not yet, she thought. It's not time yet. Miles away, in the base's dining facility, Admiral Ree was holding court, regaling a table of junior officers with his version of the morning's events. The story grew with each telling. "So there I am," he boomed, gesturing dramatically. "And this little thing, I swear, she couldn't have been more than 5'6", is sitting there acting like she knows the first thing about a Predator drone feed. Looked like she should be teaching a kindergarten class, not touching my gear." The table roared with laughter, right on schedule. "So what did you do, Admiral?" Hayes asked, leaning in eagerly. "What do you think I did? I gave her a lesson in how the real world operates." "Told her to stay in her lane?" Admiral Reese scoffed, stabbing a cube of cantaloupe. I give her a week, tops. These civilian contractors are all the same. They get a tiny glimpse of how we do business, and they scamper right back to their safe little office jobs where a paper cut is a major injury. Commander Brooks, the head of base security, just scowled into his coffee mug. He was older than the rest, and he'd seen a dozen arrogant officers like Reese cycle through. There was a fine line between confidence and carelessness, and the Admiral loved to tap dance all over it. But this consultant, she had all the right clearances? Brooks asked. Oh yeah, her paperwork was immaculate. Her ID is legit, and I'm sure the paperwork is squeaky clean, Reese said, waving a dismissive hand as if swatting a gnat. It's the same old story. Someone in procurement gets a nice little kickback, and suddenly we have civilians wandering around the base like they own the place. Still, Brooks set his coffee down. It might be wise to have my people double-check everything, he said, his tone thoughtful. We don't just hand over access to the drone control systems to any random person. Knock yourself out, Reese shot back with a smirk. You'll find it's all by the book, which is the whole problem. We're drowning in lawyers when what we really need are warriors. The conversation then shifted to the upcoming training exercise, a joint operation with Army Rangers to practice a stealth beach landing. It was just another 3-day marathon designed to prove, once again, that Navy SEALs were the apex predators of the modern world. Reese was completely in his element, mapping out strategies, assigning roles, and making it painfully obvious that failure wasn't an option. Could this woman really be just a simple tech specialist? If you're starting to get a suspicious feeling about all this, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want to support more stories where quiet competence puts loud arrogance in its place, just tap that thanks button. Nobody even noticed Commander Brooks slip out of the mess hall, his phone already pressed to his ear as he ordered a deep dive background check on their newest civilian hire. Meanwhile, back in the drone control room, the woman moved through her diagnostic procedures with a calm, methodical pace. On the surface, everything looked perfectly normal. She was checking file access logs, running system performance reports, and doing all the standard maintenance you'd expect from a good technician. But underneath that facade of routine work, in the tiny milliseconds between her official tasks, she was doing something else entirely. She was connecting invisible lines between who was accessing what data, mapping the secret flow of information to find the anomalies, the little digital tripwires that screamed someone was playing a different game. Her mission, assigned 3 months prior, was simple. Get inside this base, blend in, and pinpoint the source of a catastrophic leak. Someone here was selling highly classified tactical plans to private military companies. And they weren't just dumping files. They were carefully selecting the data, timing the leaks to cause maximum disruption while making it almost impossible to trace back to the source. The traitor wasn't just a turncoat. They were an expert in military information systems. That meant the mole had to be someone high up, someone with top-tier clearance who knew exactly how to cover their tracks. The obvious suspect was Admiral Reese. He had the access, a potential motive, and more than enough ego to believe he could get away with it. But the obvious answer is almost never the right one. 3 months of silent observation had taught her this base was a tangled web of personal loyalties and bitter rivalries. There were at least 6 people who could be the mole, probably more. So she kept her head down, played the role of the quiet, nerdy contractor, and let everyone write her off as a nobody just filling a seat. She made herself forgettable, easy to ignore, and utterly invisible, which was exactly what she wanted until she had enough hard evidence to bring the entire corrupt operation crashing down. Just then, a tiny alert flickered on her screen. Someone was trying to access a file she had flagged equipment logs for a training mission that happened 6 weeks ago. It wasn't top secret. But here was the interesting part. That same file had been accessed twice in the last month by people who had absolutely no reason to be looking at it. She didn't block the access. She didn't trigger an alarm. She simply watched, logged the event, and silently added another piece to the complex puzzle she was assembling. The door to the control room swung open. Lieutenant Hayes swaggered in, trying to look cool and confident, but mostly just coming off as a bully. "Hey, miss," he began, not even bothering to learn her name. "Admiral's orders. This terminal is off limits to civilian personnel during operational hours. I'm going to need you to log out. I'm in the middle of running system diagnostics. she replied calmly, her eyes still glued to her monitor. I should be finished in about 20 minutes. Yeah, well, operational hours started at 0600, he retorted, flicking his hand in a shooing motion. So, I'm gonna need that to happen immediately. She quietly saved her work, logged off the system, and gathered her tablet and the small toolkit every tech carries. Hayes watched her leave, a smug grin plastered on his face. It was a small victory, but it felt great to put a civilian in her place. He couldn't wait to brag about it to the other guys at lunch. You know what your problem is? Hayes said, leaning against the console she'd just vacated. You civilians have zero understanding of the chain of command. You don't get what it costs to earn a place here. We spend years of our lives training, bleeding, and proving we belong. Then someone like you shows up with a contract and expects the same access and the same respect. She paused at the door. You're absolutely right, Lieutenant, she said, her voice even. I don't understand that at all. Her response completely disarmed him. He had been braced for an argument, for her to start quoting regulations at him. Her quiet, total agreement threw him completely off balance. Just stay out of our way, he stammered, his comeback sounding pathetic even to his own ears. She walked out without saying another word. The moment she was gone, Hayes whipped out his phone and opened the unofficial group chat. Most of the junior SEALs used the one that was strictly against regulations, but that the higher-ups chose to ignore. Dudes, you will not believe this, he typed. The Admiral just shut that new contractor down, but she has this insane attitude, like she thinks she's some hotshot. You should see her strutting around here like she owns the base. The replies came in a flood, jokes, memes, and GIFs. One guy started a betting pool on how long it would take before she quit. Another suggested they should make her their personal coffee runner. It was just harmless hazing, the kind of ritual every new person had to endure. The logic was simple. She'd either learn to take a joke or she'd leave. Either way, their problem would be solved. The text flew back and forth all morning, the story twisting and growing with each message, embellished with fake details until she was no longer a person, but a caricature. By lunchtime, it seemed like half the base had heard the tale of the arrogant contractor who tried to boss around an admiral. The fictional version was way more entertaining than the truth. It was funnier, juicier, and easier to share. The woman at the center of it all sat alone in a corner of the mess hall, forcing down a sandwich that tasted like cardboard and regret. All around her, conversations ebbed and flowed, war stories from past deployments, complaints about upcoming drills, gossip about promotions and assignments. She just listened, absorbing it all, seeing the patterns within the patterns. She saw who deferred to whom, which cliques were inseparable, and where the true lines of power were drawn, far from the official organizational chart. Chief Warrant Officer Kline entered with his maintenance crew. He spotted her, leaned over, and whispered something to his buddies. They all glanced her way, shared a quick laugh, and moved on. The bread felt like paste in her mouth, but she made herself finish it. She kept her breathing steady, falling back on that 4-count rhythm they drill into you until it becomes second nature. In through the nose, hold. Out through the mouth, hold. It was the same breathing that had gotten her through Hell Week, through SARE school, and through countless Black Ops missions designed to break a person down to their absolute core just to see what was left. Her watch read 1337. She had a meeting at 1400, a standard check-in with the base IT director. The official purpose was to go over software patches and network security protocols. The real purpose was a dead drop, a secure way to pass intelligence up the chain without creating a digital trail. She took the last bite of her sandwich, cleared her tray, and walked back across the base under the oppressive heat of the Pacific sun. It wasn't the dry heat of the desert. It was a heavy, humid blanket that soaked through your clothes and made the air itself feel sticky. The IT building was an old concrete bunker, a relic from an era when the Navy thought a few feet of reinforced concrete could stop any threat. Inside, the air conditioning was fighting a losing battle it had been waging for decades. The director's office was on the second floor, behind a door with a simple plaque that read, CDR James Walsh, Information Systems. She knocked once. Come in. Walsh was 45 but looked like he was pushing 60. He'd spent too much of his life staring at glowing screens, hunting digital phantoms and trying to patch security holes in systems that were obsolete when he first enlisted. He was a sharp, dedicated officer who had absolutely no clue that the woman walking into his office possessed a security clearance so high he wasn't even authorized to know it existed. "Ah, good. You're punctual," he said, gesturing to a chair that was completely buried under a mountain of technical manuals. "Just shove that stuff on the floor." "Okay, we need to talk about these new firewall updates. The latest directive from Cyber Command is a complete nightmare for our current infrastructure." She shifted a stack of manuals, took a seat, and woke up her tablet. For the next 10 minutes, they slogged through a painfully dull and perfectly believable conversation, covering network security, software update schedules, and nagging vendor problems. Finally, Walsh leaned back, stretching, and rubbed his exhausted eyes. "I'm heading out for coffee. Can I get you anything?" "No, I'm fine, thanks," she answered. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the clock started. She had roughly 6 minutes. Walsh was a creature of habit. The break room was 2 floors below, and he always used the stairs to hit his daily step count. He drank his coffee black with 2 sugars. The entire trip, from his desk and back again, took exactly 6 minutes. She knew this because she had timed him on 3 separate occasions. She was at his computer in a flash. He'd left it logged in a careless move, but totally in character. She clicked through to a specific shared drive, hidden under a cascade of 3 other folders. There, she created a new, encrypted file, making it look like a standard system log. Inside, she dumped the payload she'd been collecting: network access patterns, file timestamps, and a list of user IDs that didn't match the official employee roster. The upload finished. She wiped the local copies from her own device, cleared the recent file history on his computer, and was sitting back in her chair. The whole operation took 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Walsh came back through the door at 6 minutes and 15 seconds. A little too close for comfort. He was carrying 2 cups. "I changed my mind," he said, setting one down for her. "Looked like you could use one, too." She accepted it and took a small sip. The coffee was terrible. The kind of cheap, government-issue brew that tasted like it was strained through an old combat boot. Getting hassled first thing in the morning had just become part of the gig. They pulled me over again, right inside the gate, demanding to see extra identification. Every step was by the book, which somehow made the targeted intimidation feel even worse. They knew exactly who I was. This was just their way of reminding me that they were always watching. If you've ever been the one person in the room that everyone is trying to catch in a lie, you know exactly how that feels. What they didn't know was that I was the one baiting the trap. Stick around, and I'll tell you exactly how I flipped their own game right back on them. Just a few hours before, I was sitting in a mind-numbing meeting with a guy named Walsh, talking about firewall protocols and choking down horrible coffee just to keep up appearances. The real report from that meeting wasn't on the papers he handed me. It was already being beamed to Fort Meade for the big bosses to dissect. "How long have you been stationed here?" one of the security officers asked, his voice completely deadpan. 3 months, I replied. "And where were you posted before this?" "I'm a contractor," I stated, keeping my tone just as flat as his. "We don't get postings." He gave me a little sneer. "Right. Your last time's job asterisk then. That information is classified." His little smirk vanished. That line always got a reaction, the 2 of them exchanging a quick, uncertain glance. A civilian pulling the classified card is a red flag. Most of the time, it's a bluff. But every once in a while, it means you're talking to someone so far up the food chain that their clearance can't even be verified at this level. "We're going to have to make a call on that," the first guy said. "Please do. The number is on my clearance paperwork." And they would call. A real person at a real agency would answer and confirm everything I said. My cover was rock solid, built on the sacrifices of agents who weren't as fortunate as me. They finally let me go around 4 in the afternoon. My living quarters were essentially a concrete box with a metal frame bed and a desk that looked like a leftover from the Cold War. It didn't bother me. I've slept in places that make this look like a palace. I've been on assignments that would have mentally broken most people before the first week was even over. I perched on the edge of the squeaky mattress and gave myself exactly 60 seconds. Just one single minute to let go of the act, to breathe normally, to just be myself. It was the only break I ever allowed. Then the minute was up and the mask went back on. It was time to get back to it. On my tablet were encrypted files that could easily start a war detailed. Training schedules, personnel rosters, supply chain routes, everything an enemy force would need to plan a catastrophic attack. And that was the whole point of me being here. Someone on the inside was selling off these secrets, and I was sent to find out who. The list of suspects was starting to take shape. You had Reese, the commander who had a death grip on every minor detail. Then there was Hayes, a guy who looked like he'd have a heart attack if you said hello too loud. You had Klein, the tech chief who seemed to know a lot more than his job required. And finally, Brooks, the head of security, whose random inspections felt way too personal to be random. Any single one of them could be the mole, or maybe they were all working together. There was only one surefire way to know. I had to poke the hornet's nest until something flew out. Tomorrow was the day I started making some real noise. My plan was to go where I wasn't supposed to be and access files that would trip every single alarm on the base's network. I had to put so much pressure on the traitor that they'd be forced to make a mistake and reveal themselves. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple, I thought about the thousands of good people serving here, holding the line every single day. The vast majority of them were heroes, but not all of them. There's always one who decides to break faith. I set my alarm for 4:30 in the morning. I wanted to hit the control room right during the shift change, when the night crew was exhausted and the day crew was still half asleep. It was the absolute best time to get inside and the perfect moment to see what would happen when I stopped playing by the rules. Sleep came instantly. It's a survival skill you pick up in this line of work. 4 hours later, the alarm on my watch jolted me awake. I dressed in the dark, pulling on the same nondescript contractor uniform, and did a quick mental inventory. ID badge, tablet, tools, and the watch, with a tiny, hidden panic button I prayed I would never have to use. At 5 in the morning, the base was a ghost town, eerily silent except for the quiet movements of a few maintenance workers and other early risers sticking to the shadows. I navigated the quiet corridors until I arrived at the main control room. My access card chirped and the electronic lock clicked open. Inside, a single young operator was slumped over a console, looking half-conscious. "Morning," I said, my voice low. He jumped, startled. "Whoa. Good morning." He was just a kid, probably on his first real assignment, full of nervous energy and quick to apologize. "You're starting early." I offered him a simple, boring excuse. Figured I'd run some diagnostics before the network traffic picks up for the day. "Oh, right, that makes sense," he said, already grabbing his jacket, clearly thrilled to be relieved. "All systems are green. We had a tiny glitch on the satellite feed around 0300, but it sorted itself out. I'll take a look at the logs," I replied. "Sounds good. Well, I'm heading out." He practically sprinted toward the door. And just like that, I was alone. The room was filled with the steady, low hum of server fans. I sat down at the primary console and began to dig, pushing past the surface-level reports and into the system's guts, the user authentication records, the file transfer logs, the digital breadcrumbs that everyone leaves behind. And then I saw it. A massive spike in data transfer at 3 in the morning, precisely when that so-called glitch occurred. Someone had logged in using a remote terminal, downloaded a small, compressed data package, and logged out. To a normal observer, it would look like a minor system hiccup, but the login originated from an IP address that traced back to the Admiral's personal office, a building that was supposed to be completely locked down and empty at 3 a.m. I quickly snapped a picture of the screen with my tablet, encrypting the evidence instantly. "Just what do you think you're doing?" The voice came from the doorway, but I didn't even flinch. It was Klein, the tech chief, standing there with his tool bag slung over his shoulder, his expression a perfect mask of suspicion. "Running diagnostics?" I answered coolly. "It appears someone has been accessing restricted files." You don't have the authorization to run security sweeps. I'm not, I said. I'm checking for system errors. Looks an awful lot like a security sweep to me. He shot back, walking right up to the console and leaning over my shoulder. His eyes scanned the data on my screen, and I watched his look of suspicion melt away into pure shock. He knew exactly what he was seeing. For a long, tense moment, the only sound in the room was the whir of the server racks. You need to log out of this system, Klein said, his voice dropping to a low growl. Right now. Just a second. No, now. He reached down and put his hand on the radio clipped to his belt. Or I'm calling this in to base security. I saved my findings, logged off the console, and stood up to face him. Chief Klein, if someone on this base were selling our secrets, wouldn't you want to be the one to find out about it? What I want, he said through gritted teeth, is for civilian contractors to do the job they were hired to do. And I definitely don't want to have to explain to my commanding officer why a civilian was digging through secure logs at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's fair. I turned to leave, but he moved to block the doorway. He wasn't being threatening, just immovable. A human wall. Who are you, really? He demanded. I'm exactly who my identification says I am, I told him. My ID says you're a tech consultant. But tech consultants don't know how to pull raw authentication logs like this. He was sharp. You had to give him that. This wasn't just some guy mindlessly following protocol. I've been working in this industry for 12 years, Chief. I know when a system isn't acting right. You're not standard issue. Maybe that's because standard issue is compromised, I retorted. Or maybe you're a spy. We see it all the time. Contractors take money from our enemies to find the exact kind of vulnerability you're looking at. His hand tightened on his radio. By all rights, I should have you thrown in the brig this very second. You probably should, I agreed. But you're not going to. And why wouldn't I? He challenged. Because you've seen the signs, too, haven't you? Little things here and there that just don't add up. Strange directives, weird blips on the network. You're good at your job, Chief. You're good enough to know that something here is seriously wrong, but you're not in a position to do anything about it. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscles straining in his cheek. Get out, he finally managed to say. I walked past him, leaving him standing there with his hand on his radio, caught between following the rules and trusting his own instincts. By 600 hours, the base was awake and buzzing with activity. I was sitting in the mess hall when Reese, the arrogant commander, strode in with his entourage and marched directly to my table. Word of my little morning adventure had already started to spread. Well, look what we have here, he sneered, a cocky grin spreading across his face. I'm a little shocked you're still on this base. I glanced up from my bowl of oatmeal. Still here, sir? I heard you were in the control room at 0500 this morning. That's way outside your authorized hours. I was running diagnostics, just as you requested. That's hilarious, he said, sliding into the seat across from me while his cronies loomed behind him like a pack of hyenas. Because I don't recall asking for any diagnostics. What I do recall is telling you to keep your hands off my tactical systems. They weren't tactical systems, I replied evenly. They were administrative logs. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper, which you have absolutely zero clearance to ever look at. He spotted her there, quietly having her breakfast, and saw his chance for some morning fun at her expense. Do you think she's about to get thrown off this military base forever, or is there something else going on? Drop a comment below, because you won't believe where this goes. He slammed his palms on her table, making the bowl rattle. If I see a security issue, I'm obligated to report it, he mocked, twisting the words from her own contract. A security issue. Admiral Reese let out a loud, grating laugh designed to get everyone in the mess hall to turn and watch. Let me school you on security, sweetheart. My issue is some low-level contractor hacking into sensitive networks and then trying to hide behind regulations when she gets busted. She didn't even blink. I'm not hiding anything. No, he leaned in, his voice practically dripping with poison. You're just sitting here, eating your oatmeal as if you didn't just commit about half a dozen federal crimes. So here's how this is going to play out. You're going to finish that, then you're going to pack your things. After that, My men are going to personally escort you off this base. And if you're really, really lucky, he hissed, we won't file criminal charges. She looked him straight in the eye, completely unfazed. I haven't breached any data. Chief Klein says you did, and his word is good enough for me. So, Klein was the one who sold her out. It was disappointing, but honestly, not all that surprising. In that case, the chief can present his evidence through the proper chain of command. Proper channels? Reese's face turned a deep shade of red. You think you can get a lawyer and wiggle out of this? You think the rules apply when we have you dead to rights? She let the silence stretch out, making the tension in the room so thick you could almost feel it. With all due respect, Admiral, she said, her voice unshakable. If you're going to accuse me of committing a crime, you should probably make sure you have your facts straight first. My facts are straight. You were in a restricted area at an unauthorized time, digging through files you have no permission to see. She calmly took a sip of her water. System access logs aren't classified, sir. They're just administrative files. Anyone with basic level clearance can view them. Not at 5 in the morning. They can't, he shouted. The time of day doesn't change a document's classification. Reese slapped his hands on the table again. You're finished. I'm calling security. He grabbed his radio. Base security, this is Admiral Reese. I need a detention team to the enlisted mess hall, on the double. We have a contractor in the middle of a major security breach. The radio crackled in response. Copy, Admiral. A team is en route. She made no move to run. She didn't protest. She just sat there, using that calm, four-count breathing technique she'd mastered years ago, watching him with eyes that were as cold and gray as a stormy sea. In less than 3 minutes, 4 military police officers burst in, wearing full body armor with pistols at their sides, the whole intimidation show. The lead MP saluted Reese. Sir? This contractor was caught accessing classified networks without permission. I want her taken into custody and interrogated immediately. Yes, sir. The MP faced her. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stand up slowly and keep your hands where I can see them. She followed his instructions perfectly, placing her spoon down and pushing her chair back with her hands held open at her sides. The entire mess hall had fallen completely silent. Every single person was staring. This was going to be the story of the week. The arrogant contractor who acted like she owned the place, finally getting what was coming to her. Hands behind your back, ma'am. She complied without a word, feeling the plastic zip ties tighten around her wrists. They weren't tight enough to cause pain, but they were tight enough to send a message. Are you carrying any weapons? The MP asked. No, we're still going to have to search you. Understood, she replied. Their search was professional and quick. They patted her down, checked her pockets, and took her tablet, ID, and phone. But they didn't bother with the plain digital watch on her wrist. It was just a watch, after all. Where are we taking her, sir? The MP asked the Admiral. The brig. Cell 3. I want her in total isolation. The MP paused for a fraction of a second. Sir, Cell 3 is reserved for high-threat detainees. Are you questioning my order? Reese shot back. No, sir. They paraded her out of the dining hall, a public humiliation for all to see. She noticed someone snap a picture with their phone. It would probably be all over the base's social media in minutes. The holding facility was a cold, concrete block that reeked of bleach and despair. Cell 3 was a tiny 8 by 10 foot room with nothing but a metal slab for a bed and a toilet without a lid. A small, barred window high on the wall offered a tiny glimpse of the sky. They snipped the zip ties, the heavy steel door slammed shut, and she was alone in the silence. Anyone watching this unfold would think it was over. She was caught, disgraced, done for. But they had no idea they weren't even playing the same game she was. Her watch displayed 14:37. In exactly 23 minutes, a very powerful person would realize she had missed a mandatory check-in. In 63 minutes, a set of automated programs she had put in place 3 months prior would spring into action. And in about 2 hours, Admiral Reese was about to receive a very hard lesson on the difference between holding a rank and wielding true power. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4, Hold for 4. A fighter jet roared by outside, just another pilot on a training run, trusting that the system would protect them. But she knew the system was compromised, because the rot was coming from the very person in charge. The cell door clanked open. A man in a commander's uniform stepped inside. He seemed on edge. "I have to ask you a few questions." "Am I being charged with a crime, Commander?" she asked. "That's going to depend on how you answer." "What exactly were you doing in the control room at 5 a.m. this morning?" "I was running system diagnostics." "Why so early?" "There's less network activity. It results in a cleaner data scan." "You were accessing user authentication records," he said, as if reading from a script. "That's a standard part of the diagnostic." "Not according to Chief Klein." "Then Chief Klein," she said with a quiet confidence, "is incorrect." The commander, whose name tag read Brooks, opened a file folder. It was thick with printouts of her online activity, a long, damning-looking record. "These records show you were looking at files connected to Admiral Reese's office." She locked eyes with him. "The records show I was investigating a pattern of highly unusual access, and those patterns just so happen to originate from that office." Brooks looked skeptical. "And you didn't think this was something you should report?" "I was still gathering enough data to confirm my suspicions before raising an alarm." "That is my job." "Prying into an admiral's files isn't your job. It's a federal offense," he snapped. "I didn't access his files," she corrected him calmly. "I reviewed the access logs which show someone using his credentials to download top-secret data at 3 in the morning." That gave Commander Brooks a serious pause. "Explain that." "Someone initiated a remote login using the Admiral's security codes, downloaded sensitive naval intelligence files, and then logged out. The whole thing came from an IP address located inside his office building, which was supposed to be empty and secure at that hour." Brooks stared down at the documents in his hand, then back up at her. This had just escalated far beyond a simple case of a nosy contractor. "Are you suggesting he was hacked?" "I'm suggesting his credentials were used. Whether it was him or someone else is not my determination to make." Brooks was no fool. He could see this was a political landmine. "I'm going to have to verify this information." "Of course." He got to his feet, sizing her up. "Who are you, really?" "I'm just a technical consultant, Commander." He clearly didn't buy it for a second, but he wasn't about to ignore a potential security disaster of this scale. "Don't go anywhere," he said, as if she could. The door slammed and locked again. It was now 15:30. The first domino had just fallen. The watch on her wrist suddenly felt heavy. It had a tiny, concealed button made from a pressure-sensitive fabric, a button she hadn't needed to touch for 3 entire months. It was for emergencies only. But the protocol was clear. Trust your gut. And her gut was screaming at her. Suddenly, the base alarms erupted a deafening, high-pitched siren. Red emergency strobes began to flash in the hallway outside her cell. 1600 hours was here. At a secure building in Fort Meade, her missed check-in had officially been upgraded to a code red emergency. The door to her cell was thrown open. It was Commander Brooks. And he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You need to come with us, right now." "Am I being charged?" "The Admiral is demanding to see you." They didn't even think about zip ties this time. They hurried her down corridors that were now swarming with frantic personnel. The main control room was absolute bedlam. Alarms were shrieking as officers gaped at screens filled with streams of red error codes. And right in the center of it all was Admiral Reese, his face a perfect picture of unbridled rage. "What did you do?" he screamed at her the moment she walked in. Before she even had a chance to speak, a military policeman grabbed her by the arm, trying to drag her from the command consoles. He pulled too hard. A loud rip echoed in the tense room as her sleeve tore clean off, revealing the bare skin of her forearm. And inked into that skin was a tattoo. It was an intricate design in black and gray, but it wasn't the art that made the room freeze, it was the symbol. To every single person there with a background in special operations, it was instantly, terrifyingly familiar. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Commander Brooks's eyes went wide with sudden, dawning comprehension. The color drained from Admiral Reese's face as he grasped the sheer scale of the mistake he'd just made. This woman wasn't just a contractor. She was an operator from a ghost unit, a team that officially didn't exist, sent to hunt a traitor, and he had just cornered her, exposing himself completely. It just goes to show you, the loudest person in the room is usually hiding the most weakness, because true strength never needs to raise its voice. The tattoo was a trident, crossed by a pair of lightning bolts, but it was the set of numbers inked just below it that brought a dead silence to the room. These weren't random digits. It was a unit designation, the kind you'd never find in any official military record. The quiet that fell was different this time. It was thick with a creeping, horrible dread. Master Chief Garrett was the first to piece it together. His eyes bulged. He instinctively slapped a hand to his chest, a ghost of emotion, as if reaching for dog tags he hadn't worn in decades. "Sweet mother," he whispered, his voice trembling. "That's the mark of a JSOC operator, a task force insignia. In 43 years, I've only ever seen that twice." Klein, a junior analyst, leaned in closer, squinting. "What does that mean?" Garrett's voice was solid as a rock now. "It means she's no contractor. I can tell you with absolute certainty," Garrett went on, "that design is only ever given to Tier 1 operators, the kind of soldiers who, on paper, don't even exist." Brooks cautiously stepped forward, studying the tattoo like he expected it to be a clever fake, but the faint, silvery lines of scar tissue mixed in with the ink told a different story. This was an old tattoo on skin that had seen battle, not something you get on a weekend pass. Admiral Reese's face was a mess of confusion turning into angry denial. "This doesn't prove anything. Anyone can get a tattoo. Doesn't mean she's special forces." "Anyone can get some ink, sir. That's true," Garrett replied, his eyes never leaving the design. "But that exact symbol, with that specific number sequence, that isn't something you can just walk into a shop and ask for. That is earned," Garrett stated quietly. "It's authorized and it's documented in a file you will never be cleared to see." She calmly tugged her torn sleeve back into place, as if revealing a top-secret military marker to a room full of officers was just a normal part of her day. "You demanded proof, Admiral. There it is." "That's not proof. It's body art. It could be a forgery, a stolen image." "Then feel free to verify it," she said, her hand moving slowly toward her breast pocket. Every eye in the room followed the motion. She pulled out an identification card, but it wasn't the flimsy contractor badge they all carried. This one was edged in red with a holographic seal that danced in the overhead lights. Printed clearly across the top was a serial number. "Pentagon Access Authorization. Joint Special Operations Command," she stated evenly. "The serial on this card will be an exact match for the unit designation in that tattoo. Go on, run the numbers. Your own security system will tell you precisely who I am." Klein's hands shook just a little as he took the card and slid it into the security reader. The system hummed, taking much longer than it should have, as it dug through databases most of the world doesn't even know exist. The screen finally flashed green, and a block of text appeared that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "Commander, Ward, J, Special Access Program. Sovereign, Ghost, Status, Active, Clearance, Top Secret, SCI Plus, Special Access Program. Unit, Task Force, Redacted." A second window suddenly popped up, showing an official personnel photo. It was her, years younger, decked out in full combat gear. The patch on her shoulder was a perfect match for the tattoo, and she was standing beside two generals whose names were blacked out, but whose faces were unmistakable. Then a third window appeared, displaying a service history so heavily censored it was almost entirely black bars, but you could still connect the dots. 12 years of active duty, countless deployments, a list of commendations identified only by their classified codes. A Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, medals that were only earned in the thick of the fight, and right at the bottom of the file was an official certificate of death, dated 2 years prior. "Killed in action, Syria, convoy ambush." Brooks's voice was a hollow whisper. You're supposed to be dead." "On paper, I was," she said, offering nothing more. The unspoken truth hung in the air like gun smoke. Klein spun to another monitor. Sir, her security clearance is higher than every single person on this entire base. That includes you. It would take an authorization from the Pentagon itself just to view her complete file. Admiral Reese stared at the monitors, his knuckles turning white where he gripped the edge of the console. This is ridiculous. JSOC doesn't conduct operations on U.S. soil without informing the base commander. We have protocols for a reason. Yes, we do, she agreed, her eyes locking with his. And one of those protocols is for top-secret internal investigations, when there's suspicion of corruption at the highest levels of command, when the official channels can no longer be trusted, when our soldiers start dying because someone on the inside is selling them out. As she spoke, the main screen refreshed. The security audit that had been running quietly in the background was now finished. Data flooded the displays, logs of who accessed what files, records of data transfers, security, timestamps, everything was color-coded. Green for routine, yellow for suspicious, and red for a direct security breach. The screen was a sea of red, and nearly every single red flag traced back to one user's credentials. Reese's blustering facade finally shattered. That data has been planted. The authentication logs are all verified with biometrics, sir, Klein reported, his voice flat and robotic, as if he were reading an autopsy report. Your fingerprint, a retinal scan, all time-stamped from your private office terminal. This wasn't somebody just guessing your password. A new window opened, showing a real-time data analysis. Every file Reese had secretly accessed was now being compared against intel reports of failed or compromised missions. Every time there was a match, it lit up on screen, fully documented. The correlation percentage at the bottom of the screen began to climb. 70%, then 80, then 93. Sir, Klein said, looking like he was about to be sick, the data shows that every single time you access these specific tactical plans, the related mission went catastrophically wrong within 72 hours. The pattern was so clear it was a statistical impossibility. It wasn't just bad luck. Commander Brooks's hand was now resting casually on his sidearm, not as a threat, but simply ready. Admiral, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the console. This is insane, Reese shrieked, backing away like a trapped animal. You're all going to believe this fabricated digital ghost story over a man with a 30-year career? 30 years of dedicated service. Ward's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. You built a career, you earned the trust of everyone under your command, and then you cashed it all in, selling out your own operators to private military contractors. Tell me, what was the price? Project Nexus? Nexus Strategic Solutions, she said, confirming his fears. You've been leaking them highly classified mission intel for the past 8 months, and our financial forensics team found payments that align perfectly with those data leaks. Every time you copied a sensitive file, a large deposit appeared in an offshore account you thought no one could ever trace. Another screen lit up, this time showing bank statements and wire transfers that snaked through a web of shell companies, a complete, undeniable trail of money and betrayal. At that exact moment, the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades chopped through the air, growing louder by the second. 4 Black Hawk helicopters were descending fast on the base helipad, and these weren't your standard transport choppers. They were mobile command units, the kind that only show up for 4-star generals or in a state of emergency. Reese's face went completely white. Who did you call? I didn't call anyone, she replied, calmly watching the helicopters land. The mission protocol did. It was triggered automatically the moment I missed my 1600 hours check-in. It's a standard failsafe for deep cover operations, she explained. A single missed check-in triggers an immediate, high-priority response team to secure the operative and all related evidence. The helicopter bay doors slid open, and 4 figures emerged. Even from this distance, you could see the stars on their shoulders flashing in the sun. Generals. And they were walking with a kind of focused intensity that meant this was anything but a friendly visit. Reese turned back to Ward, his anger now replaced with raw desperation. Listen to me. We have 45 minutes before the backup power for this lockdown fails. If you want to handle this by the book, that's fine. But we have to secure all this evidence before the entire system goes dark. How very convenient for you, Ward said dryly. It's the absolute truth. Go on, check the power logs. These generators weren't designed to run this long. We have 45 minutes, maybe even less. Ward looked over at Klein. Confirm that. The young analyst's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the power management display. He's telling the truth. Backup power is at 63%. Based on the current drain, we have approximately 42 minutes before non-essential systems, including this entire audit program, begin to shut down. Then we finish this right now, Ward declared. She turned her head and her eyes locked onto Lieutenant Hayes. The officer who had gone out of his way for 3 straight months to make her life a nightmare, spreading rumors she was incompetent, mocking her in front of the others, trying to undermine her at every opportunity. Lieutenant Hayes, I need you to do something for me. Hayes jumped to attention, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. Ma'am, for 3 months, you told anyone who would listen that I didn't belong here, that I was useless, a complete waste of a uniform, she said, her voice perfectly level, stating facts without a hint of emotion. Now, I need you to prove yourself wrong. I want you to pull every detailed access log, every single file, every data transfer, and every single authentication. How often do we underestimate the quiet ones, the people we write off every day? If you've ever felt overlooked, hit that share button, because you need to see what happens when the tables finally turn. For Hayes, that moment came when he was ordered, "Show this room who the real snake is." The command felt like a body blow. His expression cycled through humiliation and defiance, before landing on weary resignation. "Why me?" he muttered. "Because you're a pro," Ward answered. "Because despite everything, you play by the book, and because you need to see this with your own eyes. When the dust settles, the official story will be that the very people who questioned me helped expose the truth." Hayes glanced at Reese's panicked face, at the undeniable proof on the screens, and then back at Ward. "Yes, ma'am." He whipped around to a console, fingers blazing across the keyboard, pulling up data that had been hiding in plain sight for months. The only sound in the room was the clock ticking down. 41 minutes left. "I'm in," Hayes said, his voice raw with tension. "It's an access pattern from Admiral Reese's account, but it's got a shadow." Another user with the highest possible clearance was mirroring his every move, accessing the exact same intel, sometimes just hours apart. "Who was it?" Brooks shot back. Hayes displayed the authentication log and all the color drained from his face. "It's General Corbin." He looked at every single file the Admiral did, sometimes right before, sometimes right after. It's like they were working in tandem. Ward's face was stone, but a muscle in her jaw gave her away. "General Corbin," she said, her voice dangerously low, "was one of the officers who signed off on this operation. He suggested using a deceased operator's identity for deep cover. He's the one who put my name forward for this assignment." The implications settled over the room, thick and poisonous. "He was on to you," Garrett growled. "He knew you were closing in on Reese. He thought he could pull all the strings from the shadows, but it was so much worse." "Hayes is still digging," Garrett added with a sneer. "General Corbin accessed the same intel briefing that sent Commander Ward's team into that meat grinder in Syria. 2 hours before they rolled out, he altered the route, downgraded the threat assessment, just a routine update, he called it. A heavy silence crushed the control room, the hum of servers suddenly deafening. Ward closed her eyes for one long, agonizing beat, then opened them. "He tried to have me eliminated," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "When that failed, he decided to use me. He sent me here to catch Reese, thinking he was untouchable." "We need to radio the incoming command team," Brooks said, his hand already moving to his comms. "Hold," Ward ordered, raising a hand to stop him. "Let them walk right into it. Corbin has no clue we're on to him. If we tip our hand now, he'll disappear behind a mountain of red tape." The monitor showed 38 minutes remaining. At that exact moment, the door hissed open, and 4 generals entered. They weren't wearing tactical gear, but their immaculate service dress uniforms, the kind that meant this was coming from the highest level. The general in the lead was a woman with 3 stars on her collar. Her silver hair was pulled back with severe precision, and her eyes looked like they could cut glass. She swept her gaze across the room, a look that had witnessed every form of betrayal known to man. 3 other high-ranking officers followed her in 2 men and another woman, all of them sporting arrays of ribbons and stars that told stories of decades in command. Master Chief Garrett's body went rigid as he snapped to attention. He knew one of them, a man he'd served with 20 years prior, long before the stars had appeared on his shoulders. The female general's gaze passed over each person before finally locking onto Ward. The silence in the room was absolute. This was the moment everyone had unknowingly been waiting for. Every soul in that room was frozen in place, just watching. The entire chain of command, generations of military protocol, it all just hung there, suspended in time. Then, in that deafening quiet, the general's hand shot up. It rose, clean and sharp, into a flawless salute. A collective gasp swept through the room like a shockwave. Someone dropped a data pad, and the clatter echoed like a gunshot. Hayes's mouth fell open, his eyes wide as the reality he'd built over the last 3 months shattered into a million pieces. Klein literally flinched back, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. Brooks's hand, which had been reaching for his sidearm, froze where it was. He'd completely forgotten what he was about to do. Reese made a strangled noise, the sound of a man watching his entire universe burn down around him. Commander Ward, the general's voice was sharp enough to cut diamonds. Every single syllable was packed with the full weight of her authority. "It's good to have you back, ma'am." The other 3 generals immediately followed suit, their movements synchronized and perfect, executing 3 more salutes. They were crisp, respectful, the kind you give a peer, vaporizing any doubt about who Ward truly was. As Ward returned the salutes, her entire demeanor shifted. It was a subtle change that meant everything. She was no longer the quiet analyst trying to fly under the radar, no longer the civilian enduring disrespect from men who thought they were her betters. She stood like an officer, a commander, a woman who had earned this moment through 12 years of blood, sacrifice, and brutal choices. General Hartwick, Ward's voice was different now. Still quiet, but with a new, hard edge of command she'd kept hidden. "Appreciate the fast response. We've been waiting since you missed your check-in," Hartwick shot back. "The moment this base went on lockdown, we were wheels up." Her eyes then shifted to Reese, and the temperature in the room plummeted 20 degrees. It was a stare that could make combat veterans sweat ice. "Admiral Conrad Reese," she stated, "I'm General Patricia Hartwick, Joint Special Operations Command. You are hereby under arrest for numerous violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, including, but not limited to, the unauthorized disclosure of classified intelligence, conspiracy, and conduct unbecoming an officer." Reese's voice was a hollow rasp. "This is all based on manufactured lies. The evidence," another general stepped forward, his uniform, a testament to a long career, was collected over 3 months of direct surveillance by one of our most decorated field operatives. Commander Ward has been operating undercover in this facility since August, observing, documenting, and building a case that is absolutely ironclad. Every file you touched, every dollar you transferred, every encrypted message you sent, it's all been logged on secure servers you didn't even know existed. Hayes could only stare at Ward like he was seeing a ghost, and in a way, he was. The contractor he had mocked, the civilian he had dismissed, the woman whose every move he had second-guessed. It was all an act. "You were JSOC the whole time?" He stammered out. "Every snide comment I made, every rumor I started." His voice cracked with shame. "Ma'am, I am profoundly sorry." "We'll deal with that later, Lieutenant." Ward cut him off, her tone pure business. "Right now, I need those logs. We have 34 minutes before we lose backup power. General Hartwick requires the complete intelligence picture, and that must include General Corbin's part in this." The air in the room got another 10 degrees colder. Mentioning Corbin's name was like setting off a grenade. You simply don't throw an accusation like that at a 4-star general without airtight proof. Hartwick's expression was unreadable, but her eyes turned to ice. "Elaborate," she commanded. With his hand shaking just slightly, Hayes brought the data onto the main screen. It showed 2 distinct access patterns, one for Reese and one for Corbin, moving in perfect, horrifying sync. He then displayed the altered intel briefing for the Syrian mission that had been a death trap for Ward, the numbers and timestamps painting a crystal clear picture of betrayal from the very top. General Corbin has been the puppet master from the beginning, Ward explained, her voice now cold and clinical, like a surgeon describing an operation. He's the one who turned Reese, he established the shell corporations, and he personally quashed any internal inquiries that got too close. She locked eyes with Hartwick, and when your operation needed a ghost operator to go deep undercover, he served me up on a silver platter. He positioned me to take the fall with Reese, keeping his own hands clean as the man running the oversight committee. What's Corbin's current location? Hartwick demanded. Brooks frantically checked the base security feed, his voice tight. He drove off base 20 minutes before you initiated the lockdown. That's not a coincidence, Ward stated flatly. He got a warning. Someone in your command chain tipped him off. He knew my check-in window down to the second, and he knew precisely when it was time to run. A tiny muscle jumped in Hartwick's jaw, the only visible sign of the inferno of rage just beneath her calm exterior. We'll plug that leak. For now, we secure Reese. Then we will hunt Corbin down with every asset at our disposal. She gave a slight nod to the military police, who moved in with practiced silence. They read Reese his rights while fastening him with restraints reserved for high-value targets. A final formal sign that this was over and there was nowhere left to run. As they led him out, Reese stopped and looked back at Ward, his eyes pleading for an explanation. How was the only word he could force out. It started in Syria, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It started when I woke up in a field hospital, the only survivor, knowing someone had given up our position. My soldiers weren't lost in a random firefight. The words hung in the silence. I've been a ghost for 2 years, Admiral. 2 years hunting the men who murdered my team. And for the last 3 months, I've been right here, watching you prove you were one of them. As they escorted him from the room, the heavy door slammed shut, sealing his fate. Ward then grabbed her real tablet, an encrypted, military-grade device that made his civilian tech look like a child's toy. On it was the case file she'd spent months building from the shadows. It was a sprawling map of betrayal, each connection a thread in a web of greed. General, this goes way beyond Reese and Corbin, she explained, angling the screen toward Hartwick. The audit flagged 16 other officers on 6 different bases. We've got 4 private contractors and even 2 sitting congressmen taking kickbacks to approve shoddy defense contracts. A dizzying list of names, secret bank transfers, and intercepted communications scrolled across the screen. I have everything, Ward stated flatly. It's all here, ready for the prosecutors. Hartwick's face was like stone, impossible to read. But her eyes showed the cold, hard satisfaction of knowing justice was finally coming. Commander, she said, her gaze locking onto Ward, I need to ask you something. For 3 long months, she had been nobody, a ghost haunting the hallways. Her superiors had told her the deep cover operation had taken its toll, that she could take a quiet desk job, train rookies. Nobody would blame her. They said she'd earned her rest, but her voice was unyielding. With all due respect, ma'am, I'll rest when every single person who sold the intel that got my operators killed is in a cell, not 1 second sooner. She laid out her strategy. Use the Admiral's arrest to spook the bigger fish. Make him so nervous he'd make a mistake trying to clean up his mess. They told her it could take years. She didn't even flinch. I know. I'll do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes. A faint knowing smile touched the lips of the 3rd general, who had been quiet until now. She's definitely got your stubborn streak, Patricia, she observed. This is what happens when they're that committed. The head of the operation simply nodded. We'll brief you on the next phase in the morning. For tonight, you are officially Commander Ward again. Try to enjoy it. Yes, ma'am. As Ward saluted and pivoted to leave, a familiar face blocked her path. It was the old Master Chief, who'd been watching her since she first arrived. Ma'am, permission to speak my mind? Go ahead, Master Chief. He started listing off the details. Her tattoo, the precise way she handled a drone controller, her calm breathing patterns under pressure. I knew something was different about you, he admitted. I just couldn't figure out what. He then snapped to attention, throwing a salute so sharp it could only have been perfected over decades of service. Should have recognized the Joint Special Ops training. I went through that same nightmare myself back in '98. A hint of a smile touched Ward's face. You've served with honor, Roy. Your record is perfect. You could have blown my cover a dozen times, but you didn't. Thanks for trusting your instincts. Figured if somebody went to all that trouble to hide, he replied, relaxing his stance, they must have had a damn good reason. His voice softened. Welcome home, Commander. Thank you, Master Chief. She walked on, the familiar halls of the base slowly coming back to life as the emergency lockdown was lifted. You could see the confusion on everyone's faces as they emerged from lockdown, their hushed whispers filling the air. As she passed, those whispers followed her, spreading the story of the quiet, low-level contractor who turned out to be a ghost. The operator who outranked an admiral and came back from the dead to clean house. By morning, the story would be a base legend. By 1900 hours, she was back in her temporary room, a tiny concrete box that had been her entire world for 3 months. She sat on the hard metal cot and gave herself 60 seconds. Just 1 minute to not be a soldier, to not be the unbreakable operator, and to just feel the crushing weight of it all. Just 60 seconds to be human. A moment later, her secure tablet chimed. She opened it. The message was a work of art, titled Consequence Cascade Implementation. It laid out the immediate actions against the traitor she'd just exposed, authorized surveillance on his boss, and launched sweeping investigations across 12 separate military facilities. It even detailed institutional reforms to prevent this from happening again. It was all there. It was official. It was real. She read it twice. The cascade was already in motion. A fever breaking in the system, burning out the infection. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. A damn good start. Then a second message appeared. This one was from an encrypted, unknown source. The subject line alone sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Tower 4 sends regards. There was no message, only an attachment. It was a grainy photograph of a compound in Syria, with coordinates and a date from 2 years ago. Her team's convoy route was marked with a chilling red line, showing the exact path they took into the ambush. Someone had documented their final moments. Someone who watched it happen. And in the corner of the photo, a shadowy figure stood on a rooftop, too far away to see a face, but holding something, a radio, or maybe a detonator. Someone was there. Someone watched her team die. Someone who planned the whole thing. Someone who was still out there, walking free, believing they were safe. She stared at the picture, her thoughts a whirlwind. She didn't write back. She just saved the file to a secure drive. This was new evidence for a new hunt, a mission that, she now understood, was never really over. A soft knock on her door broke the silence. She put the tablet away and opened it. It was Hayes, the young lieutenant, looking pale and ashamed. "Ma'am," he stammered, I came to apologize. I was out of line. The way I acted, the things I said, I should have been better." "You were following the example set by your commanding officer, Lieutenant," she replied, her voice even. "That's part of your training." "I know, but still," he insisted, finally looking her in the eye. "I made assumptions. I treated you like you were nothing." He looked at her, really seeing her for the first time. "If I can do anything to make it right," she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Remember how you feel right now. This exact moment when you realized how wrong you were. The next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your expectations, don't just dismiss them. Look closer, ask better questions. That's how you make it right. That's how you become the officer you're meant to be." "Yes, ma'am, I will," he saluted, and she returned it. He walked away looking like a man who just had a tremendous weight lifted from his shoulders. She closed the door and looked back at her tablet. The image from Tower 4 was still on the screen, a silent dare. It was a single thread that, if she pulled it, would unravel a darkness that went far deeper than simple corruption. A place she knew she was destined to go. She opened a reply to the mysterious sender and typed just 2 words. "I'm coming." She hit send. The message disappeared into the encrypted web, a promise sent to the ghost who was now being hunted by another. Outside her window, the Hawaiian sunset painted the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, a beautiful lie that made it almost possible to forget that the deadliest wars are the ones fought in the shadows. Somewhere on that base, the admiral she exposed was sitting in a cold, lonely cell, his empire turning to dust. Somewhere in Washington, analysts were pulling at the threads she'd given them, unraveling criminal networks he'd built over decades. And somewhere out in the world, the people who thought they'd gotten away with murder were starting to feel a chill run down their spines. And the person who watched her team die 2 years ago, the one who felt so safe, they were wrong. Because she was patient, she was methodical, and she would never, ever stop. She lay back on the cot, her breathing falling into the steady, 4-count rhythm that kept her alive in Syria and kept her sane these last 3 months. Tomorrow would bring new briefings, new enemies, and maybe a new identity. But tonight was about victory. Maybe not total victory, but a piece of it, and that was enough. It was the kind of victory that proves that even when the war seems endless, some battles can be won. Her watch showed 2,200 hours. In 10 hours, she would have new orders. In 11 hours, she might have a new name, a new face, a new life created in service of something bigger than herself. But for tonight, she was Commander Elise Ward. She had fought, she had won, and her mission would go on. On a quiet memorial wall back at headquarters, her name would soon get a small, coded update. Return to active service. Classification restricted. Most people who saw it wouldn't understand, but the operators would know. They would know what it really meant, and they would raise a quiet glass to the ghost who came home, the one who proved that sometimes being declared dead is just another way of being deployed. You see, true justice isn't loud and fast. It's quiet. It moves in the shadows, buried in encrypted files and secret reports. It breathes in a steady 4-count rhythm you can only learn under fire. It wears whatever face it has to wear to see the mission through, and it never, ever stops until every last bit of the rot has been burned away. They laughed at her, thinking she was just some low-level contractor they could push around. What they didn't know was that her real authority towered over their crooked games. This is the story of how they found out the hard way, so stick with me to the end, and be sure to subscribe to MVB Story so you never miss a thing. Looking up, she saw the familiar stars she once navigated by, the only fixed points in a world of chaos. Tomorrow, a new fight would begin. But tonight, after a long and bitter struggle, the truth was finally out. Commander Elise Ward took a deep breath, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she allowed herself to truly rest. It just goes to show every person carries a history that most will never see. If you really pay attention, you'll be amazed at what you learn. Thanks for sticking around to the end.